Have you ever built your entire life around control, only to realize it cost you the one thing you couldn't replace: connection? James Whitaker was a millionaire CEO who had everything: power, precision, prestige. But behind his glass office walls, he carried a silence no one saw. And Claire Monroe, she was just a consultant until she walked into his company with a voice that threatened to unearth everything he'd buried. What do you do when someone sees past your title and into your wounds? Would you push them away to protect what you've built, or risk everything for something real? This is not a story about office romance. This is a story about two people standing at the edge of themselves, haunted by the past, humbled by truth, and forced to choose: protect the lives they built, or become the people they were meant to be. If you've ever loved quietly, lost silently, or longed for something deeper than success, this story is for you. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories if you believe in the kind of love that changes people not overnight, but one quiet moment at a time. Let's begin. James Whitaker didn't believe in coffee to go every morning by 6:30 a.m. He was already seated at the corner booth of Lou's Diner, a small brick and wood place tucked between a flower shop and a dry cleaner on 14th Street in Stamford, Connecticut. No suits, no boardroom buzz, just chipped mugs, scratchy jazz on the radio, and the scent of burnt toast hanging in the air. He liked that. He liked things that didn't pretend to be anything other than what they were. That morning, like most mornings, he sat alone, a plate of scrambled eggs, unbuttered toast, and black coffee. One hand gently turned the pages of the Wall Street Journal. The other tapped the side of the mug, a habit he didn't realize he had. He was 52, but if you asked, people would have guessed younger. Something about the quietness in his face made you want to know what he wasn't saying. Behind that calm exterior lived a mind that built one of the most powerful private media firms on the East Coast. He wasn't on the Forbes cover, not because he couldn't be, but because he chose not to. He never liked attention. People in the company called him the architect: quiet, brilliant, and utterly composed. But to those who worked closely with him, there was another nickname that whispered in office corners: the man who never breaks his own rules. And he had one rule, spoken more than once, and always in that low, steady tone that left no room for debate. I don't date employees. Not because he was worried about gossip, not because of HR policies, but because once, just once, he broke that rule, and the fallout nearly broke him. The rain had started earlier that morning. Soft, tapping rain. Connecticut rain, mild, thoughtful, almost polite. James checked his watch. 7:03 a.m. He was supposed to be at the office by 8 now, Zuren, but the thought of arriving early gave him no thrill today. A major restructuring project was starting, and he had a dozen meetings lined up. One of them was with the new woman they'd hired, someone HR said had great potential. He hadn't reviewed her file yet, didn't care to. He had learned long ago that names on resumes told you nothing about the weight someone carried in their eyes. Back at Whitaker & Co., the storm outside had grown louder. Rain streaked down the tall windows like tears. James stood in the glass-walled conference room, flipping through a presentation deck. His assistant popped in. "Mr. Whitaker, the new strategic consultant is here. Claire Monroe. Do you want to sit in on the orientation?" He shook his head, absent-mindedly. No need. I don't get involved in onboarding. But something he wouldn't even be able to say. What made him pause? Maybe it was the way the assistant said her name. Maybe it was the storm. Or maybe it was that gnawing feeling in his chest that had been there for months. He walked out of the room and down the hallway, stopping just outside the training center. Through the partially open door, he saw her. She stood by the whiteboard, holding a dry erase marker like she'd been in charge of meetings her whole life. Her blazer was slate gray, but her voice was full color, confident, clear, laced with the kind of authority that comes not from schooling, but from surviving. The problem isn't that your structure is broken, she was saying. The problem is you're managing people like they're spreadsheets. Culture isn't a line item, it's the foundation. She paused, made eye contact with someone in the back row, then added softly, "You can't grow what you don't respect." James's breath caught. He wasn't sure if it was the content of what she said or the way she said it. It was simple, true, brutal, and it didn't care who in the room outranked her. That was the moment. That was when something shifted. He left the doorway, quietly. Before anyone noticed he'd been standing there. That evening, after a day of back-to-back meetings and numbers that blurred together, he returned to Lou's Diner. Same booth, same coffee. But this time, he didn't read the paper. He just sat there, watching the door. And when Claire Monroe walked in soaked from the rain, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders, he looked away before she could see him. Because suddenly, the rule he had spoken for years didn't feel like a rule anymore. It felt like a shield. One he wasn't sure he wanted to hold up any longer. "Don't be stupid," he muttered to himself. "You don't date employees." But his heart didn't agree. Not this time. It had been 17 days since Claire Monroe walked into the company and into James Whitaker's mind, uninvited, unannounced, and undeniably present. James hated counting days. It reminded him of things that slipped out of control: grief, waiting, regret. But here he was day 17, and he still remembered the exact shade of her voice. Steel wrapped in silk. Claire had been assigned to lead a restructuring initiative that James himself approved, but hadn't planned to get involved in. Whitaker & Co. had grown too fast, and now they were bloated, top-heavy, and bleeding talent. The board had wanted someone with an outside perspective. Claire was recommended by a trusted partner who described her as a fixer with the heart of a builder. He hadn't expected her to be what she was. She didn't just know business. She knew people, and not in the shallow, manipulative way so many consultants did. She read the quiet. She noticed who avoided eye contact. She stayed late without making noise about it, and she drank her coffee black without flinching. She had weight, real-life weight, and James noticed that. That Monday morning, James was already in the office by 7:20. He told himself it was to get ahead on emails. But when he found himself outside conference room B, where Claire was leading a team alignment session, he knew better. The glass door was slightly ajar. He could hear her voice again. "You don't fix broken culture with free pizza and a ping-pong table," she said calmly. "You fix it by listening when people say they're exhausted. By noticing when silence replaces feedback." One of the managers interjected something defensive. Claire paused before responding. "Let me ask you this," she said gently. When was the last time someone disagreed with you in a meeting? Not after, during, silence. Claire smiled, not smugly, but like someone who'd been on both sides of that silence. If nobody's pushing back, chances are you're not building trust. You're building fear. James looked down at his phone, even though there were no notifications. That afternoon, she knocked on his door. You asked to see me. He looked up. She was holding a notebook, plain and slightly worn at the edges. No laptop. No corporate armor. Yes. Come in. She entered, sat down without waiting to be invited. Most people hesitated. Most waited for a cue. Claire didn't. I'm not sure what this meeting is about. Mr. Whitaker, she said, flipping open her notes, but I'm ready. He studied her a moment, then said flatly, James is fine. Claire blinked once, nodded. All right then. James? He could feel the air shift, just slightly, like the first stir of wind before a storm. They spoke for almost 40 minutes. At first about the project timelines, team dynamics, internal resistance. Then it turned more abstract. You speak like someone who's been in the trenches, he said, not looking at her directly. I have, Claire replied. Small business owner. For 15 years. Lost everything in year 16. Divorce, lawsuit, bankruptcy, you name it. Her tone wasn't bitter, just unfiltered. James didn't know what to say. Most people hid their scars. Claire wore hers like fingerprints proof of having lived, so why consulting? He asked. She smiled. Because it pays well. And I'm too damn tired to start over from zero again. Then she added, quieter, but also because I believe broken systems can heal. If someone has the stomach to face them. James sat back in his chair. That line didn't just apply to companies. It applied to people, especially him. Later that night, at Lou's Diner. James sat at his usual booth. The waitress, a kind, middle-aged woman named Ellen, brought his black coffee and raised an eyebrow. You all right, hon? You're staring at that wall like it owes you money. He blinked, smiled faintly. Just thinking. That new woman at your company. Claire. Right. She came in here last week. Tipped well. Asked for extra whipped cream on her pie. That's my kind of woman. James laughed just once, but it surprised them both. The next morning, Claire found a small note on her desk. No name. Just clean handwriting. Broken systems can heal, if someone has the stomach to face them. I wonder if the same applies to people. Underneath it, a sticky note. She stared at the note for a long time, then tucked it into her worn notebook, like something you don't want to lose but don't know what to do with yet. By the end of the week, Claire had become both admired and quietly resented in the office. She was a disruptor without trying to be. She didn't smile unless she meant it. She didn't apologize for asking hard questions. And somehow, James respected her more for that than he could ever admit. But respect wasn't the problem. The problem was the thing he hadn't felt in almost a decade. Anticipation. When her footsteps echoed down the hall. When her voice appeared on a calendar invite. When he saw her handwriting on a whiteboard from across the room. Anticipation had a heartbeat, and James Whitaker had spent 10 years keeping his pulse steady. He found himself at war with his own rules. You said you don't date employees, a voice inside reminded him. I don't, he argued back. But he knew rules were just promises we make to our past selves. And maybe, just maybe, It was time to break one. The company had a wellness room technically. It was a small space on the 12th floor with 2 armchairs, a fake ficus, and a stack of dog-eared mindfulness books no one had opened since 2018. Claire found it one rainy afternoon, in need of silence after a tough meeting with the finance department. She sat in the farthest corner, took a breath, and let it out slowly. It had been one of those days. The kind where every solution seemed to expose a deeper fracture beneath the surface. She looked down at her hands. The skin near her knuckles was dry, slightly cracked. The kind of detail most people wouldn't notice. But she did. She noticed everything now. Because she'd learned that silence had a texture, and pain didn't always scream. Across the building, James Whitaker stood in his office, staring out the window as mist settled over downtown Stamford. He wasn't thinking about quarterly reports. He wasn't even thinking about Claire, though her name did hover in the air like a familiar perfume. He was thinking about Emma, his daughter, 19, a freshman at Duke University, studying political science, far away from his world of glass towers and guarded silences. She rarely called. He rarely asked her to. After the divorce, James had thought he was doing the right thing by stepping back, letting Emma find her own way, letting her hate him, if that's what she needed. But now, watching the fog roll in, he wondered what it would have been like to just be softer, to say, "I'm sorry," without the explanation, without the armor. That evening, James returned to his home. 6,000 square feet of custom hardwood floors, vaulted ceilings, and windows no one ever opened. The house was beautiful, the kind that made realtors use words like exceptional and crafted with intention. But it wasn't warm. Not really. In the great room, beside a stone fireplace he rarely used, was a photo. Just one. James, years younger, smiling. A woman beside him, elegant, poised, the kind of beauty that came with effort. And between them, a girl no older than 9, her hair in braids, holding a stuffed dolphin. James picked up the photo, wiped a fleck of dust from the glass. Then, almost as if rehearsed, he placed it face down. The next morning, Claire arrived at the office early, as always. But she paused when she saw something taped to the wall outside the elevator, a flyer for the company's upcoming charity gala. Black tie, silent auction, benefiting mental health initiatives in local schools. She felt a flicker of something nostalgia. Maybe. Before her world fell apart, she used to organize events like that, before the foreclosure, before the custody battle, before her ex-husband filed for bankruptcy under both their names and left her to sort through the rubble. "You ever go to those things?" a voice asked behind her. She turned. James, standing with a coffee in hand, not his usual ceramic mug, but a disposable one, already a sign that something was off. "I used to," she said, brushing a piece of lint from her blazer. "Back when I wore dresses that didn't come from consignment shops." James tilted his head. "You don't seem like the kind of person who measures herself by where her clothes come from." Claire gave a soft laugh. "You'd be surprised. Even strong people have moments of smallness." He didn't respond right away. Just looked at her like she'd said something that wouldn't leave him for a while. "Come to the gala," he said quietly. She blinked. "Are you inviting me as a consultant or as someone I'd like to see outside the office?" he said, then paused. "If that's not breaking a rule." The air between them held its breath. "You're the one who makes the rules," she said softly. "Aren't you?" James didn't answer. He didn't need to. That night, Claire sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment just off Main Street. A two-bedroom walk-up with mismatched furniture and a cat named Remy, who liked to sleep in the sink. She thought about the invitation, the way his voice had dropped when he said, "Someone I'd like to see." And she hated how fast her heart had responded, not because she didn't like him, but because she did. And she'd promised herself a long time ago that she wouldn't fall for another man who didn't know how to stay. In a drawer beside her bed, under old utility bills and expired insurance forms, was a letter, unopened, from her ex-husband, postmarked 6 months ago. Claire had kept it, unopened, not out of hope, but because closure, like grief, was never about one grand moment. It was about deciding which wounds to live with. She looked at the envelope for a long time that night and didn't open it. James, meanwhile, sat at his kitchen counter, eating cold pasta from a container. The only sound, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. He picked up his phone, scrolled through contacts, stopped at Emma. His thumb hovered over the call button, then dropped. He opened his notebook, the one no one at the company had ever seen, and wrote 3 words, "Scars don't speak." He stared at them, then underlined the sentence once. The flight to Nashville was delayed 3 times. Claire sat by the gate, legs crossed at the ankles, thumbing through a dog-eared paperback she kept in her tote bag for travel. Around her, businessmen barked into phones, children cried into sticky hands, and the scent of pretzels and bad coffee hung in the air like disappointment. James sat 2 rows away, half turned toward the tarmac. He hadn't said much since they arrived at the airport. Just a few clipped updates from his assistant, and a nod when Claire asked if he needed anything. She watched him for a moment. He looked tired, but not the kind of tired sleep could fix. The kind that settled in your bones, made a home there. "You okay?" she asked softly, approaching. James blinked, startled just enough to reveal he'd been somewhere far away in his head. "Just thinking," he said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "Want to sit?" She did. They sat in silence for a few minutes. "You ever get used to it?" Claire asked, still looking ahead. "Airports?" "No. The traveling. The empty hotel rooms. The sense that you're always in motion, but never really arriving anywhere." James gave a slow, quiet chuckle. "You're not wrong." By the time they landed in Tennessee, it was past 9 p.m. The rental car took them through winding streets, past neon bars and quiet neighborhoods, until they arrived at a boutique hotel tucked between a bookstore and an old stone church. Their rooms were next to each other. Same floor, same hallway. When Claire stepped inside hers, she closed the door, leaned back against it, and let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since they left Connecticut. The room was simple beige walls, worn carpet, and one large bed with too many pillows. She turned on the lamp by the window, letting the light spill over the floor like honey. Outside, the city hummed quiet, steady, like a lullaby she almost believed in. There was a knock. Soft. 2 taps. She opened the door. James stood there, hands in his pockets, looking like a man who had something to say but hadn't yet decided how. "I don't want to interrupt," he said. "You already did," Claire replied. but she smiled when she said it. He hesitated, then glanced over her shoulder at the soft light behind her. It's a nice room. Yours probably looks the same. Still, it looks warmer in here. That hung between them. You want to come in? She asked, voice lower now. James didn't answer with words. He stepped inside. Claire didn't offer him a drink, didn't make small talk. They just sat on opposite ends of the bed, like teenagers too old for games and too young to pretend they didn't want more. James looked down at his hands. When I was younger, I thought control was the answer to everything. That if I built walls high enough, nothing could hurt me. He paused, then met her gaze. I was wrong. Claire said nothing. Just let the moment breathe. I used to think people like you didn't exist, he continued. People who could walk into a room and change the air, not with charm, but with truth. She felt her throat tighten. Words wanted to come, but they weren't ready yet. James, she began, but he moved closer. Not all the way, just enough that she could feel the warmth of him. Tell me to leave, he whispered. She didn't. Instead, she reached out and touched his wrist. Not a grand gesture, just contact. Real, quiet. His eyes closed, just for a second. Then he stood. I should go. Claire nodded. She didn't ask him to stay. That wasn't the kind of woman she was. And James respected her for that more than he could say. He reached the door, turned back. There's a threshold, he said, and I don't know if I'm ready to cross it. That's okay, Claire replied, but don't pretend it's not there. James looked at her one last time, then left. Back in his room, James sat on the edge of the bed and ran both hands over his face. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter, Emma. Just landed in Charlotte. Don't worry, I'm safe. He stared at it for a long while before replying. Glad you're okay. Let's talk soon. He hit send, then set the phone face down. Claire, meanwhile, crawled beneath the comforter, eyes open to the ceiling. She didn't feel regret, but she felt something. Like standing at the edge of a dock in the dark, the water stretching out before her, full of things she couldn't see but wanted to swim toward anyway. The next morning, they met in the hotel lobby. He held the door for her. She didn't thank him. Some things don't need words. The office was quieter than usual when they returned from Nashville. It wasn't the kind of quiet that meant things were peaceful. It was the kind that meant people were watching. Claire could feel it in the way conversations stopped when she walked into a room. The way eyes lingered a second too long, then darted away. No one said anything outright, but the walls had ears, and the air held questions. She ignored them, because she had work to do. Because pretending nothing had changed was easier than admitting everything had. James kept his distance for 3 days. Not because he didn't want to see her, but because he didn't trust himself anymore. His usual calm, his calculated, cool-headed self had slipped. That moment in her hotel room, the nearness, the way her presence made his thoughts louder, messier, more human. It terrified him. For a man like James Whitaker, emotion wasn't just inconvenient, it was dangerous. It clouded decisions, it broke deals, and it always demanded a price. On the 4th day, Claire was leading a strategy session in the main boardroom. A long, polished walnut table, tall-backed leather chairs, One wall of glass overlooking the city. James wasn't on the agenda, but he showed up anyway. He stood quietly near the doorway, listening as she spoke clear, confident, pulling insights out of chaos like she was born to do it. "This isn't about quick wins," Claire said, pointing at a slide. "It's about foundational change. You can't build trust if you're still managing through fear." A younger executive shifted in his seat. "With all due respect, not everyone agrees that the culture needs fixing." Claire turned toward him. No smile. Just truth. "That's because the people most affected by it don't feel safe enough to speak." The room fell silent. James stepped forward. "She's right." Every head turned. He rarely interrupted meetings. Rarer still did he side so openly with anyone. Claire met his eyes, and something passed between them. Something not meant for the room. After the meeting, she found him waiting by her office door. "You don't usually crash meetings," she said, unlocking the door. "I don't usually feel compelled to speak." "So why now?" James stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "Because watching you speak truth to a room full of people paid to ignore it that mattered." Claire leaned against her desk, arms crossed, steady, but curious. "You know, people are talking. Let them." That's a bold statement coming from a man who built a career on controlling every outcome. James exhaled slowly, then took a step closer. "You asked me, back in Nashville, what I was afraid of." She didn't remember asking it out loud. "The answer," he said, "is you." That caught her. "Me. Not in the way you think." He said, "I'm afraid of what you make me feel. Of how you see through things I've spent years trying to hide. Of the way I want things I told myself I'd buried." Claire swallowed. There it was. The wall cracking. The heart fighting the reason. He stepped forward again, now within arm's reach. His voice lower, but unwavering. "I've lived a long time inside my head, Claire, and I've done pretty well from there. Built a company, built a reputation, built distance. But you," he whispered, "you make me want to come back down." Claire didn't speak, didn't move. And then he did something she didn't expect. He reached out, gently, and placed his hand on hers. "Tell me I'm not making a mistake," he said. She looked up at him. "I can't promise that," she said, voice quiet. "But I can promise I won't run, even if it gets messy." That was all it took. One moment, one choice. He kissed her. Slow, certain. No fanfare, no desperation. Just years of loneliness collapsing into one shared breath. She pulled him closer, not to take, but to steady herself. And then he lifted her gently, without words, and placed her on the edge of her desk. Not as a move, not as control, but because something in him needed to be that close to something real. Their foreheads touched, their breathing slowed, time folded in on itself. Then James stepped back, hands shaking, eyes wide, not with regret, but with fear of what came next. I shouldn't have." "Yes. You should have," Claire said, cutting him off. "You just need to decide what to do now." James looked at her like a man who'd reached a door he never thought he'd open. "I want this," he admitted. "But I don't know if I can be good at it." Good at what Claire asked? At letting someone in? There was no answer. Not right away. Just the hum of the office outside the door, and the steady thump of two hearts trying to remember how to beat in tandem. James straightened his jacket. Give me time, he said softly. I've waited this long, Claire replied. What's a little longer? He smiled then, a real one. You always say the thing I'm afraid to. Someone has to. He left the room. Claire exhaled. And in the quiet that followed, she realized something that wasn't just a kiss. That was a beginning. For 3 weeks, they kept it quiet. James and Claire moved through the office like two people who knew the line between what was allowed and what was real. Their eyes met during meetings. Fingers brushed when they passed each other in the hallway. And sometimes, when no one was around, he'd pause outside her door just to hear the rhythm of her voice. But with every passing day, the line grew thinner. One Thursday afternoon, just before the quarterly board review, James walked into the main conference room and noticed a file already placed at his seat. Inside a printed email chain. Anonymous. Typed in all lowercase. Accusations about favoritism, inappropriate boundaries, and unethical influence on executive decisions. At the bottom, one sentence stood alone. She's not there to fix the company. She's there to sleep her way up it. James stared at the words. Cold and surgical. He didn't need to ask who she was. Later that day, Claire found him in his office. He didn't look up when she entered. We need to talk, she said. He nodded, still didn't speak. I assume you've seen it. James finally met her eyes. They didn't sign it, but they didn't need to. Do you believe it? She asked, voice steady, but raw. No, he said without hesitation. But the board might, and perception always eats truth for breakfast. Claire crossed her arms, a wall rising in her chest. So what now? He rubbed his temples. I'll ask HR to move you into a different division. Give us distance. You're doing this to protect me or to protect yourself. Silence. James, she said, softer now. Tell me the truth. You're scared. Of course I'm scared, he snapped, because for the first time in years, I care about something that isn't a line item or a bottom line. She looked at him, then not as her boss, not even as the man she kissed, but as someone who'd built his life out of glass, beautiful, sharp, and always on the verge of shattering. I didn't come here to ruin your reputation, she said quietly. I came here to do the work, and you've done it. Then let me keep doing it. James stood up, paced the room. There was something coiled inside him, something he hadn't named. Claire, when I was 39, I cheated on my wife. The words landed like a slap. Claire didn't move. She found out. Took Emma. Left. I didn't fight it. I thought I was being noble. I thought stepping back would make it easier. But really, I just didn't know how to be vulnerable. He paused. The air thick with memory. Since then, I've kept everything in a box. Controlled. Clean. Even Emma, she calls on holidays. Texts when she lands somewhere. But she doesn't ask about my life. And I don't ask about hers. He looked at Claire now, eyes stripped of all their usual steel. You asked me once if I was ready to cross the threshold. I thought I was. But maybe I'm still the man who lets people walk away. Claire walked toward him, slow and steady. Then be someone else. James closed his eyes. It's not that simple. No, she said. It's not. But it's possible. The next morning, Claire submitted a formal request to be transferred out of the restructuring initiative. Her explanation was clear and professional project alignment complete. Leadership buy-in established, execution to be managed by internal teams. She didn't mention James. Didn't need to. By afternoon, her new desk was on the 7th floor, far enough to create distance, but still within the same building. She packed in silence. Only Remy, her cat, would know how much this move cost her. James watched her leave from his office window. He didn't try to stop her, didn't run after her, didn't say goodbye. Because for all his feelings, for all his truths, he still didn't believe he deserved her. That weekend, he drove to Vermont, the family home, the one with peeling white shutters and a porch swing that hadn't moved since his father passed away. He hadn't been back in years. The house was cold, dusty, but familiar. In the attic, he found old boxes, Emma's baby clothes, letters from his mother, photos of his wedding day. He sat on the wooden floor and wept. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears that had waited too long. Claire, meanwhile, sat at a coffee shop across from her new apartment, 2 blocks from her old one. But it felt like a world away. She opened her notebook and wrote, "He said he doesn't know how to be vulnerable. I think he already is. He just doesn't know what it looks like when someone stays." That night, she opened the letter from her ex-husband. Finally, inside, a check, small but unexpected, and a note. "I know I failed you, but I'm glad you survived me." She folded it, tucked it into her coat pocket, not as closure, but as proof that some endings aren't neat. They're just necessary. James returned to the city the next day, the house behind him, the silence inside him. But something had changed. He wasn't lighter, but he was clearer. And sometimes, that's the first step toward healing. On a gray Monday morning, everything unraveled. It started with a headline, then a press release, then 4 missed calls from the board. By the time James Whitaker arrived at the office, reporters were already outside, their microphones like spears waiting to strike. The story had broken overnight. A whistleblower inside Whitaker & Co. had leaked confidential client data to the media, sensitive documents, memos, financial projections, names. Worse, the leak appeared to come from the strategy division, the very department Claire had just handed off. Inside the boardroom, tension gripped the air like static. James stood at the head of the long table, flanked by silent executives, legal counsel, and a visibly rattled HR director. "We're still confirming the source," someone said, "but the implication is serious." James didn't speak. "Not yet. We need to act fast." Another added, "Issue a statement. Fire someone. Show control." James looked down at the printed packet in front of him, and at the top, Claire Monroe's name. He didn't believe it. Not for a second. But the story was moving faster than the truth. Meanwhile, Claire was in her new office on the 7th floor when the email alert popped up, "Urgent investigation notice." She read the subject line twice, then once more. When she opened the message, her stomach dropped. She was being asked to step away from all active projects pending an internal compliance review. No context, no explanation, just protocol, and silence from James. She walked, not angrily, not tearfully, just walked down the hallway, into the elevator, out of the building. The air was cold, the sky a flat silver. She didn't go home, didn't call anyone. Instead, she walked to Lou's Diner, sat in James's usual booth, ordered black coffee, no sugar, and waited. Back in the boardroom, James had reached his limit. He stood slowly, pushed the packet aside. "We're not scapegoating the one person who actually tried to fix this place? A murmur swept through the room. Mr. Whitaker, you wanted someone who would tell the truth. Remember? James said, his voice sharp now. That's what Claire did. What she always did. She had access. So did half this table. He snapped. He paused. Then something shifted in his tone. You want a fall guy? Fine. You're looking at him. There was a stunned silence. James reached for the microphone at the center of the table and spoke directly into it, knowing it fed into the company-wide stream. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Whitaker & Co., not out of guilt, but because I will not be part of a culture that protects comfort over integrity. He looked around the room. Claire Monroe didn't betray this company. She challenged it. And if that's what gets punished here, then this company is already broken. Then he walked out. He didn't go to his office. He didn't gather his things. He went to Lou's diner and found her sitting in the corner booth. His booth. She looked up as he entered, and for a moment, neither said anything. Then she slid the coffee across the table toward him. Figured you'd come, she said. James sat down, exhaled, looked tired, but also lighter. They tried to pin it on you. I know. I didn't let them. Claire nodded once. I didn't think you would. A long pause. I stepped down. Claire blinked. You what, resigned? James? Because I couldn't protect the people I asked to believe in me if I stayed. She searched his face. Was it worth it? He didn't answer right away. Just wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. Steam curled upward like a soft exhale. I think, he said slowly, this might be the first honest thing I've done in a very long time. They sat in silence after that. The kind of silence that doesn't demand anything. That simply is. Then Claire spoke. I've spent most of my adult life holding things together that were never mine to carry. Me too, James said. But maybe breaking isn't always the worst thing. He looked up. You broke me open, he said softly. And I'm still trying to decide whether to thank you or run from you. Claire smiled. Not triumphant, just real. Well, you're sitting here. For now, that's enough. Later that night, Claire returned to her apartment and stood in the doorway, coat still on, keys dangling from her fingers. Remy meowed from the kitchen sink. She whispered into the empty room. He didn't run, then set her keys down and smiled. James, meanwhile, drove to the bridge outside town, pulled over, sat in the car with the window cracked open, and let the cold in. He called Emma. She picked up on the third ring. Dad. Hey, everything okay? No, not really. But maybe that's the point. She was quiet for a moment. Did something happen? I quit. Another pause. You okay? James smiled. I think I might be. And for the first time in years, he meant it. Autumn came quickly in Vermont. The trees outside James's childhood home glowed red and gold, their branches shaking with the kind of wind that smelled like endings. He stood on the back porch with a mug of tea in his hand, wearing a worn flannel shirt and jeans that hadn't seen the light of day since the early 2000s. The city was behind him now. The title, the meetings, the glass walls, and in their place, silence. Not the suffocating kind, but the kind that offered space to breathe. Claire arrived on a Saturday. She didn't call ahead, just drove up the gravel road in a rental car, parked beside his pickup truck, and stepped out wearing hiking boots and a navy blue sweater. James heard the tires crunching and came around the corner. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But I wanted to." He opened the screen door. "There's coffee. I brought pie." Inside, the house still smelled faintly of cedar and something older, like time soaked into wood. They sat at the kitchen table, the pie between them, steam curling from 2 chipped mugs. Claire's hands wrapped around her cup the way she always did, like holding warmth, made her feel grounded. "You look rested," she said. "I'm not," James answered, "but I'm trying." Claire smiled. "That's enough." They talked for hours, not about the company, not about the scandal, not about who was right or what was fair. They talked about growing up, about Emma, about regret and the way it lingers, not to punish, but to remind. James told her about his father, a stern man with kind eyes who taught him to split wood and never leave tools in the rain. Claire told him about her son, now 23, living in Seattle, trying to start a life that didn't look like the one he came from. That night, they walked through the woods behind the house. No flashlights, just the moon above and the sound of their feet crunching leaves. At one point, Claire stopped. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. James looked up at the stars. "All the time. I just never used to believe I had a say in it." And now he turned to her. "Now I think maybe becoming who you are is a choice." In the days that followed, they found rhythm. James spent mornings chopping firewood and writing. Claire brewed coffee and read by the window. They made soup, shared silence, listened to old jazz records on a dusty turntable. There was no declaration, no dramatic kiss in the rain, just the slow unfolding of something steady and real. One night, as they sat by the fire, Claire asked, "Do you miss it? The job, the power, the certainty?" James stared into the flames. "Sometimes, but I miss less than I thought I would." "And what do you have now?" He turned to her, eyes soft. "Company, and the chance to be someone different." She nodded. "That sounds like enough." One morning, Claire found a letter on the kitchen table, folded, unsealed, her name on the outside. She opened it. "Claire, you once told me you couldn't promise not to make mistakes, but you could promise not to run. I've thought about that every day since. I stepped down because I wanted to be someone worth staying for, not just for you, but for myself. This house was never home to me until you sat at that table and poured me coffee. If you're still willing to stay, even just for a while, I'd like to keep the kettle warm. James." She folded the letter slowly, didn't cry, but let out a long, deep breath that had waited years to be released. That night, they stood on the porch again, wind in the trees, her hand in his. "I'm not going anywhere," she said. "Neither am I," he replied. And that was it. No fireworks, no applause. Just two people who had broken, healed, and chosen each other not out of need, but out of something stronger, understanding. 6 months passed. Not fast, not slow, just steady, like the kind of time you measure not in deadlines, but in the way your shoulders start to rest lower each day. Claire had taken on new work, freelance strategy consulting, nothing too big. Nothing that would steal her peace. She worked from cafes, from porches, sometimes from the passenger seat of James's truck on long drives through the mountains. And James, he was learning how to live, not lead, not manage, just live. He built a greenhouse behind the house, learned how to grow tomatoes, picked up woodworking, started a blog not for money, but to say things out loud. They called it a season of becoming. One day, an email arrived, subject Whitaker & Co., annual gala, special guest invitation. Claire read it over her morning tea. It was addressed to James, but she was copied. At the bottom, the board would be honored to welcome you back. No expectations, only respect. Your story, your voice, your presence. James stood at the sink, washing a skillet. "Are you going to respond?" she asked gently. "They probably want a speech." "Probably." "You think I should go?" Claire didn't answer right away. "Then I think sometimes it's not about going back to who you were. It's about letting people meet who you've become." The gala was in early April. New York, skyscrapers again, black tie suits and glittering chandeliers, waiters balancing champagne on silver trays. James hadn't worn a tux in years. Claire helped him tie the bow tie in their hotel room, her fingers gentle, the silence familiar. "You look like someone I'd have been too afraid to talk to a year ago," she teased. James smirked. "You would have told me my metrics were outdated and walked away." "Maybe." She laughed. "But I would have noticed your hands." "Why?" "Because you hold things like you're afraid to crush them." That quieted him, because it was true. When they entered the ballroom, heads turned, not in scandal, but in recognition. Like people who had heard a story and were now meeting the version they'd only imagined. James didn't seek the stage. He stood at the back, Claire by his side. But when the host called his name, he didn't flinch. He walked forward slowly, took the mic, paused, then spoke. "I built this company to solve problems. I didn't realize, for a long time, that the biggest problem was how afraid we were to be human. You don't have to burn out to prove your value. You don't have to hide who you are to be respected. And you don't have to win to be worthy. 6 months ago, I stepped away because I believed the company needed something I couldn't give. But what I've learned since is that sometimes stepping away isn't quitting. Sometimes it's choosing to become better before you return. Tonight, I'm not here as your former CEO. I'm here as a man who finally let go of the armor and found something softer underneath. Thank you for still seeing me." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was deeper than that. It was real. Claire met his eyes across the room and gave the smallest nod. Yes, that was him. Afterward, they walked outside together, the city alive, yellow taxis, horns, the smell of hot dogs and ambition. "You did well," Claire said. "I didn't plan a word. That's how I knew it came from you." They stood on the curb, neither in a rush. "What now?" James asked. "Now we go back?" "To Vermont." "And she smiled. "To each other?" The next morning, before leaving the city, James visited an art supply store, bought a blank canvas, set of oils, brushes. Planning to paint, Claire asked, "Not yet, but maybe?" "You've changed. So have you." "No," she said. "I think I've just finally let myself be." In the car, driving back north, they didn't talk much. But somewhere between exits, James reached over and took her hand. Not tightly, not possessively, just completely. And that, they both knew, meant more than any vow. Spring in Vermont didn't arrive all at once. It came in whispers. The snow melted slowly. The creek behind James's house began to sing again. The trees budded like they were testing the idea of beginning over. Claire woke early now, not because she had meetings or alarms, but because the light that filtered through the lace curtains in the kitchen made her want to be awake for it. She poured 2 cups of coffee. James would be up soon. They didn't talk about forever, not because they feared it, but because they finally understood that love isn't built in promises. It's built in presence, in dishes done without asking, in shared glances during quiet breakfasts, in the way his hand found hers under the table when the silence between them felt too big, and then, just like that, wasn't. One afternoon, Claire stood at the greenhouse door, watching James kneel over a bed of basil. He looked peaceful. For the first time in all the months she'd known him, his shoulders weren't drawn up with tension. His jaw wasn't set in strategy. His hands weren't clenched with restraint. He looked like a man who'd learned to live in his own life. "You're thinking too loudly," James called out without turning. Claire smiled. "I was thinking you should start selling that basil and go back to being in charge of things," he teased. "You're still in charge of the compost pile. That's where all my old decisions go," he said. She laughed, walked to him, sat on the soil edge, knees brushing his. "You miss it?" she asked. "The pressure?" "No. The illusion of being indispensable. Sometimes. You were never just your title. James, I know that now." One night, rain tapped gently on the windows while they played cards at the dining table. A jazz record spun in the background, Ella Fitzgerald's voice wrapping the room in velvet. James looked at her hand mid-game and said, "You always hold your cards close." Claire arched an eyebrow. "Literally or metaphorically?" "Both." She placed her cards face up. "There, all of it." James paused, studied the cards, then looked at her. "I'm not used to someone trusting me that quickly." "It wasn't quick," she said. "It was careful." He reached across the table, fingers closing around hers. "I think I'm finally learning to trust myself. That's all I ever wanted for you." They never used the word healing. It felt too neat for what they were doing. But it showed up in small ways. In James, calling Emma on Sunday evenings, even when it went to voicemail. In Claire finally deleting the letter from her ex-husband, the one she'd carried like a reminder of all the things she survived. In how they no longer needed to fill the silence with meaning. One day, while walking the wooded path behind the house, James stopped suddenly. "I used to believe that love was something you had to earn, that if you weren't perfect, it would leave." Claire didn't respond. "But now," he continued, "I think maybe love stays when we stop performing." She slipped her hand into his. "Then stop performing. I already have," he said. The seasons turned again. The tomatoes ripened. Claire's son visited from Seattle and cooked dinner. Emma came for a weekend and stayed until Tuesday. The house, once silent, now hummed with quiet life. Not loud, not scripted, just real. One evening, Claire found James on the porch, sketching with charcoal and a pad he rarely let her see. "Can I look?" He hesitated, then handed it to her. The drawing was simple. 2 mugs on a kitchen table, a vase of wildflowers between them, light streaming in from an open window. "It's us," she whispered. It's home, he said. She kissed his temple. You're becoming someone I wish the world could have met sooner. I had to become him first, James replied. On the last page of the sketch pad, in his tidy handwriting, Claire saw words written just for her. You were never a chapter. You were the spine that held it all together. She closed the pad and leaned into the quiet that didn't need fixing. In a world that often rewards silence over sincerity, this story reminds us of something timeless. It's never too late to choose vulnerability over pride, presence over performance, and connection over control. James and Claire's journey teaches us that healing doesn't happen in grand gestures. It unfolds in the quiet decisions we make each day to stay, to speak gently, to forgive, and to try again. For many of us, especially later in life, it's tempting to believe that some chapters are closed forever. But the truth is, as long as we're breathing, we still have the chance to rewrite how our story feels, even if we can't rewrite how it began. We're never too old to start becoming not perfect, not what others expect, but simply, fully ourselves. So whether you're holding on to regret, love unspoken, or dreams set aside, this is your reminder. The most honest kind of love starts with the courage to show up as you are, and sometimes the quietest endings are the ones that heal us most. Thank you for taking the time to listen, feel, and journey with us. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of someone, or of a part of yourself you've tucked away, we'd be honored if you could share it with someone who might need it too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us keep telling stories that heal, connect, and inspire. Until next time, stay kind, stay open, and stay listening.